Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3, we're on page 1390. Middle of 1390.
Listen to 1390.
Aleph Shin Sadik. And the pages can be found if you want to follow the text in Hebrew, PDF, at ayinbeis.com. So let me sum up what we've learned. And I decided I will put some context of Mikrah, Mishnah, and Talmud here as well, because I did look ahead to see how this is going to develop. I think it's fitting now to contextualize it a bit. So, keeping in mind that Ayin Beis is the story of interface between the divine and existence, between the transcendent and the immanent, between the levels of godliness that are beyond existence and the levels of godliness within existence. Aramim Chelekai HaMelech was a very the operative expression used earlier on in Ayin Beis. Rebbe Rashab has not repeated it in a long time, but it still remains. If you go back, you see Aramim Chelekai HaMelech, bringing the Reimim was downward. Aramimcha Keser, the exaltedness, the divine that is beyond, into Elekai HaMelech, to the divine that's in the form of Elekai, Elikim, Melech, King, Malchus, relating to existence, or Aramimcha Elekai HaMelech Mamat L'mayla, that you elevate Elekai HaMelech from below into the level of Aramimcha, Reimim was Keser. And from the bottom up is Tefillah, which was the real central and the primary discussion for over 550 pages from middle of volume 2. And then here on page 1390 is when the Rebbe Rashab went over, after finishing that, on page 13, Aleph Shinun, he said, now let us discuss Torah, which draws it down from the top. And simply put, Tefillah is initiated and generated by the person in their longing and their reach upward. On a simple level, bakashas srachav, to ask for their needs, or in any other way that we call and we long and we connect to godliness, to the divine, to transcendence, and Torah is the other way around. Hashem, vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, God descended on Mount Sinai. Matan Torah, from the word matan, and Sinai, matana, a gift that God gave his Torah. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. He gave us his Torah, the Torah that is one, in which he embedded himself and instilled himself. Within this Torah, his wisdom is chachma v'ritzoni, what God's wisdom and what he wants from creation. That humans could never have initiated or generated that. There's a certain amount we could generate from ourselves, understanding certain principles and values like charity and virtue and modesty, etc. But still doesn't come close to when it's received from above. And this Torah was given to us to understand, to study, and more important, to actually derive from the Torah everything we would need to offer us direction in life. So some things are stated explicitly. Most of it, even the explicit, has to be derived from it, whether it's in Torah Shabbat Peh, the oral Torah, whether it's first in Mishnah or later in Talmud, which breaks it even to a deeper, even more detailed understanding. But generally speaking, Torah Shabbat Torah Shabbat Peh is Mikrah Mishnah, and the Talmud is drawing out further from the Mishnah due to the fact that later generation things are concealed, which I'll discuss in a moment. So in discussing Torah in that context, Mikrah, Mishnah, Talmud, he explained that they all originate from Atzilus. Everything is in Atzilus because the Torah originates from the highest levels of godliness. But in Atzilus itself, the difference is Chabad, Chagas, and Ihi. With Mikrah coming from Chabad, most intense, divine cognitive power of God's wisdom, understanding Anal Chachma Binah Das, Mishnah coming from Chagas, which already elaborates. Remember, Chagas Midis is already a relationship. In the words that he used earlier, and I'll just cite a few words, I think that'll be very helpful. When he starts speaking about Mishnah, he says following words. I'm reading from page 1367. He says, Zah, which is Midas, is that the Ur is not coming from Chabad, it's coming into, it should be commensurate to the worlds, and that's why it's called Hashem Zeh Nikra Zohar Ampin. Okay, this is like the detailed roadmap or blueprint. And that's why this can be revealed in the world of Yetzirah. And that's why in the Mishnah is explained, Kol haprotim, all the details bischalkus, as they break down, that in this manner the carbon, the offering is kosher, and that can be elevated and encompassed in the divine, the infinite divine. So basically the midas, Torah, as it manifests from Chabad into the midas, midas means, as we learned, also measurement, into parameters, into structure, which is what the Mishnah does. The Mishnah lays out all the halachas and the laws that the Mikrah is concealed in the Mikrah, because the Mikrah is the pasuk, the written Torah is in a very concentrated form. So it's either story form or very brief and without the details and explanations. And then he goes on to explain in that page how it breaks down all the mitzvah says and mitzvah slesa. So even though b'mikra nemara kol b'kitzara, in the verse it's all written, everything very concise. Okay. And even though he goes on to say that the Mikrah has everything within it, says everything is written in the written Torah. But the details of each mitzvah is not explained in the verse. The details of our Mishnah Mavur are called Bepratis. And that's because it's rooted in Chagas. So what do you see from this? That Mishnah Chagas is a level of Gilui. It's revealing that which in the Mikrah is very, very concise and concentrated. And he goes on to explain it even further. That's why we call it Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah. 6 is the 6 middays, the 60 chapters. So Shishim Hema Malachis, the 60 chapters, the 60 tractates, I should say, all connected to the breakdown of Gilui, of Yetzirah, which originates in the Midas and Zah of Atzilus. Just want to see if there's anything more I want to bring from there. Right. So now to bring this back to our discussion here, this is the example of the luminous stone. Remember, all of the levels of the Torah are Malchus, Makabel, whether it's Mikrah, Malchus of Asiya, or Malchus of Yetzirah, which is Mishnah, or Malchus of Beriyah, which is Talmud, which we'll discuss shortly. So they all are Makabel. So Mishnah, what form does it take? It's an extension of the sunlight of the written Torah. The sunlight, which, as I just said, is very concentrated, and that becomes manifest in the stone that shines. It's basically a reflection of the sunlight. So Mishnah is breaking down essentially the details that in the written Torah remains concise and very brief. And as we've been discussing, and it all comes in a form of Gilui. Mishnah is a form of Gilui. Now, what about Talmud? Initially, you'd think that Talmud breaks it down even more details. So it's even more Gilui. But as we've been learning, Beriyah, where Talmud resides, is actually a state of concealment compared to Yetzirah. Like he said, either it's because it's a revelation of a higher place, and therefore a higher place cannot be seen directly, or because it's like Chaymet Surah Tikkun, it's like the raw matter that's not yet shaped like it is in Yetzirah, so it's Beriyah Cheshach, it's dark, it's concealed. Yetzirah is Yetzirah, Mishnah. Now the explanation is because the Talmud really only came as a result because they could not derive all this that the Mishnah revealed, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh and his predecessors, and those that all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, they had the written Torah and the oral Torah, and the written Torah, the Chachmei law of the written Torah was shining the Goli in Chachmei Tata of the oral Torah. And that's why when they looked in the Mishnah, they understood all the details necessary. But then when that became concealed, so the Talmud was necessary not to break down the Mishnah into more detail, but to reveal in a concealed state when we don't have that clarity, what is the Mishnah really saying? So in the process, we learned the Talmud is mechadish, all kinds of new things that you would not find in the Mishnah. But the initial reason for all of it was because of concealment. That's why the sages of the Talmud have to go struggle and ask questions and answers and arguments and counter-arguments to derive and draw out the gilui that is there in the Mishnah. But now it's coming through darkness. And that's why Talmud is compared to the Levana, because the Levana is different than the luminous stone. Luminous stone receives the light. It's not like the power of the light of the sun, but it's essentially an extension of that. And it assumes that those properties, like we said, absorbs, assumes, it nikneh, that was the word he used. It absorbs, assumes, it acquires those properties. The sun, the moon, on the other hand, is coming into the darkness of the night. So on one hand, it's a much darker state. But then you shine a light, and that light becomes a luminary. This is the real luminary of Torah Sheba'al Peh and the Talmud. So it has an advantage over the light of the sun, even, as we learned, even over the mashpia. But it's coming through concealment, not through revelation, as the Mishnah is. The Mishnah was a revelation from above, and yes, the sages, that meaning the Tanoim, the Mishnaic sages, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and of course those before him, had to obviously understand it and studied it. It wasn't just a automatic process. Even Moshe Rabbeinu also studied Torah, but it was still, there was that clarity, that crystal clarity that they had, as we've learned. So as such, in that case, Talmud becomes connected more to a state of darkness, though you can find deep light there, and that's what they do, the Talmudic sages. But Mishnah relates much more to a state of Gilui, a state of revelation. And what we've been learning is how revelation has a quality over darkness, even though the darkness is coming from a deeper place, as we learned. Because the Tachlis HaKavonah should be Sheyiyah, so I'm reading on top of page 1390, the second paragraph there. He says, that even though the closed and concealed and hidden level of Beriyah is higher than that which is revealed in Yetzirah, there's a quality in Yetzirah because there's a crystal clarity. At the end of the day, the Mishnah has a clarity that the Talmud does not have. The Talmud has a depth that the Mishnah does not have in a revealed way, because the Talmud had to go back into the superconscious ayin to access that wisdom. But it has because it's now it's revealed, and that's a great quality. The Rebbe Rashab is going to repeat this line several times as we go forward, because the ultimate purpose is it shouldn't remain concealed; it should become begili. So in a way, Mishnah, which is really an interface, if you wish, I don't want to call it actually that, because it's still it's all part of one Torah, but it is definitely from the Mikrah to the Mishnah to the Talmud. So what is Mishnah's powerful role? Why can't you just jump from the verses to the Talmud? Because Mishnah is the elaboration and the breakdown of the details, the midas, Zah, and Yetzirah, that reveals that which is very concentrated and brief and concise in the Mikrah. So you have a clarity that was given from above, and it's a shining clarity. So though it's true that from the bottom up, when you struggle from the bottom up from darkness, you're going to reach deeper levels, But still, to have that crystal clarity, it's like saying, what's the quality of a tzaddik over a Baal Tshuva? If a Baal Mokim Shabal Tshuva Emdim Tzaddikim Gemurim Ein Yechelim Lamed Sham, since tzaddikim can't stand in the same level, they're not on the level of Baal Tshuva. Why? Because the Baal Tshuva went from the darkness, and that developed, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, a deeper thirst that a tzaddik will never have, because the tzaddik lives in water. A tzaddik is always drunk and is sated by water, by Torah and mitzvahs. He never experienced the desert and the hunger and the thirst of a Baal Tshuva. Yet, no one's going to say a tzaddik doesn't have a quality. What's the quality of the tzaddik? That he has the divine in a very crystal clear way. It's true, it doesn't have perhaps the quality of the depth that comes from distress and from darkness, but what he has is a clarity that comes that he's had through all his life. That's why a Baal Tshuva will turn to that side. Just like a student that struggles and reaches deeper levels still has something that he learns from his teacher who always had a certain crystal clear clarity. And you really want the best of both worlds. That's the ultimate purpose. So the Mishnah, so therefore, that's how the Torah was given. At Sinai, Hashem gave the Torah to Moshe in a very clear way. He gave him also the oral Torah. Everything was clear. Moshe taught it. They still needed to discuss it, and they argued about it. Like we said, even the different opinions were also given by God. But still, there was a certain crystal clarity. It's like when you're right at the mouth of the well, you shouldn't have a certain clarity. Generations continued on till Rabbeinu HaKadosh, or like you said, Rav and Shmuel, and even Rabbi Yechanan, a generation after Rabbeinu HaKadosh, still had that clarity. But then, Nis'alam HaChochmah, that's what he says, the Lashon. Earlier he said, Nis'alam, due to the Golus, or due to just the general devolution of generations. Every generation is less divine revelation than the previous one. All of that led to a concealment. And now that clarity was not there. So now we need to find that clarity through our effort from using our own seichel. Obviously, based on the principles and methodologies of Torah. And obviously also with, like you said, the bitla mesiras nefesh that they had, that total dedication that they were looking for the truth. And they had God's help as well. We're talking about the Talmudic sages. But still, far more struggle, far more effort. And that's why the Talmud is so in a language of debate and argument and this opinion, that opinion, till you finally get to clarity. So on one hand, you reach a deeper level of Chachma, Ayin. On the other hand, you still want the Mishnah. You want the Gemara to be grounded in the Mishnah. Like we learned that as well. Everything comes from the Mishnah. Because the Mishnah is the clarity that is like just like the Mishnah, everything from the Mishnah comes from the Mikrah. So it's all originated from one Torah. It's just a question of where you have, either you have the clarity that the Mishnah has from Umayla Lamata, or the clarity that comes from Mata Lamayla from Talmud, like the moon, Mishnah being more like the luminous stone. And that's the Maila of Gilui over Helam, even the Helam that have a higher level of revelation ultimately, but there's a level of Gilui in Yetzirah, in Mishnah that is, in that sense, has a certain quality that Talmud doesn't have. Okay. That just wanted to give a little summary of how to contextualize everything we've been learning. And we haven't really discussed Mikrah. He's not gotten back yet to the third example, which is vision. But when we get there, we'll see it gets a little more complicated, because ultimately all this is going to teach us that when you see with your eyes, that's the ultimate revelation. But there are paradoxes there, because on one hand, the eyes don't shine at night today. In the future, they will. That our eyes will shine like the sun and the moon. And ultimately, the eyes are going to have both sides to it. One hand, the eyes need the support. We'll learn this later, of sunlight, moonlight, candlelight. On the other hand, the eyes themselves see. And that's why the eyes are going to be ultimately, the ultimate gilui is going to be through eyesight. And we'll discuss how that fits into Mikrah, Mishnah, Talmud. You'll see it all ties together ultimately. But right now, we're still in the middle of the discussion of the difference between Beriyah and Yetzirah. And in the process, he explained also Asiyah, because Chaymer Tzura Tikkun, Chaymer is the raw state. Like he said, Toihu, Beriyah, Yetzirah starts getting shape and form, at least in general terms. Yetzirah like voihu. And then comes the third level, Asiya, where you're full, complete, finished product, and that is where all the details are revealed. Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiya. And the reason for that is because also in the Oyer it's that way. The revelation also comes in 3 stages. Like he said at the bottom of page 1389. The first stage, is Be'etzem. It's not a Gilead, like Chesed. There's the Koyach HaChesed. But it's still Heyuli, it's only potential. Second, it comes in a Gili Kloli. A person is awakened to want to do kindness, but we don't yet know what form and details how that kindness will manifest. Where it comes down into specific detail. In what manner this kindness will be bestowed. Commensurate to the recipient, that it should be received and contained by him. So just like the Eir has 3 levels, so too the Kalim, like he says, comes in 3 levels. The creation of the Yesh also comes in 3 levels. It doesn't just jump; it starts with a core, a raw matter, Beriyah, Chaimer. Then comes Yetzirah, Tzura, at least a general shape. Yetzirah, Beriyah, Cheshach. And then comes Asiya. Yeah. And then we began learning what meant, we're middle of the paragraph, the next paragraph on page 1390, which I'm going to sum up now. Okay. I'll just say one more thing, which I said already, but I'll say it again. So what do we come away from this? That Torah, as it serves as an interface, it itself also has 3 levels. As we said, all good interfaces will always consist of 3 levels. How it is from above, how it is from the recipient from below, and where they both meet. So, because when you're a true interface, you want no one to be compromised. Like a translator, let's say, between Hebrew and English. So you need to have someone who speaks perfect Hebrew, someone who speaks perfect English, and now you need a translator who knows both, knows the language of the speaker that's speaking in Hebrew, translates it into the English. So you need to have all 3. If, for example, he knows one language better than another, so if he knows English better, so it's more going to be on the terms of the recipient, the English-speaking recipient. If he knows Hebrew better, it's more on the terms of the speaker, of the Hebrew speaker. So you need something that has all 3, that on one hand represents the source, something that is very much divine, Mikrah, something that's much more in terms of the recipient, like Talmud, through our seichel, through with the reasoning from below, and Mishnah, like he said, is coming from Mikrah, but into details that we can relate to, and gives us a Torah with halachas. But as he said, ultimately in Mishnah, it's not from the bottom up. So Mishnah, like for example, the example he gave with the Memes Haikodesh Hashma Ba'arvin, there are things in the Mishnah that are just stated. That's how it was received. The Talmud will ask, why does it say from the time when the Kohanim are able to eat truma that in the evening? So because now you're using seichel, and seichel is already on our terms. And since Torah is meant to be an interface between God and us, so we have Torah both things. You have to have the godly element in it, obviously, but you also have it in ways that we can integrate it and internalize it. So Mishnah does it step 1, and Talmud does it literally from the bottom up. Even when there's no clarity and there's darkness, you also can arrive at a clarity. So you have in Torah itself, you see a Mamayla Lamata and a Mamata Lamayla and something in between that has both from Lamayla and Lamata. So earlier we learned there primarily it's from Mamata Lamayla, tefillah, prayer, or tshuva, like we learned, real tshuva, from distress, from darkness. But there too, if you recall, he also said that even the total Mamata Lamayla, you also have Yadaita Ayim, Vashavesa Levavecha, Ke'avayu Elakim, and then then he came to Einoid, that the very darkness, that Tzimtzum itself reveals the Helam Ha'atzmi. But even Mamata Lamayla, you also have Giluyim. There's also, when we do our work here from Mamata Lamayla, we also invoke, we have the elements of Havayu Elakim, meaning that the Tzimtzum is there to express the Oyer of Elikus. The Oyer is a Gilui. So it's not just purely from the darkness to light. That's why you go through all the levels. Ein Oid is the ultimate. In Torah, you don't have Ein Oid because you don't ever hit rock bottom. In Torah, Talmud is the equivalent. In the world of Torah, in Torah Oid is the equivalent of a mamata lamaila in a mamayla lamata. So ultimately, it all comes together that you have every base covered. You have from the bottom of the bottom, you have in Torah itself from the top down, you also have a bottom-up experience when we struggle and we exert ourselves and toil in Torah. And of course, you have the mamayla lamata in all of them as well. Remember, even tefillah, at the end of the day, the Torah tells us the mitzvah that you should daven. The mitzvah of tefillah is also a mitzvah from Torah. However, the mitzvah requires our effort from below, our initiative. So ultimately, it's all rounded out, and you have interface on every possible angle, and everything is covered. And obviously, different mitzvahs and different activities that we do in different times of the year have different focus. When you take a Shabbos or a Yontif, you're getting more Iggulim Letters. Shabbos is giving us strength, but there's also effort from below. Even though Shabbos Mekatsha V'Kaima is holy on its own, even if you do nothing, you still need Avodas Adam. And Yontif even more so. Yom Kippur and so on. But then there's the weekdays when you don't have quite that strength, Mamayla Lamato. There the effort is more in the weekdays, is more from the mundane, where we elevate things from below. But there's also Mamayla Lamato. Every day we daven, we learn. We also have strength that we are given each day. So wherever you turn, you're going to find initiative from above, initiative from below, and it all comes together and each complements the other, and not one dominates. It's all a matter of different times, different stages, or different people at different stages in their lives. Obviously, when you're a young student, you're receiving more. When you get older, you learn more. You could start also be mechadish more. But there's a constant balance, a constant interconnection between all these different approaches, whether it's from the top down, from the bottom up, or in the top down, the bottom up within the top down, or the top down within the bottom up, etc., etc. Okay. Now, in this discussion of Beriyah and Yetzirah, what he calls Yetzirah, Beriyah, Cheshech, where relates more to Gili, Yetzirah, there's some shape, something distinct, something discernible. Whereas Cheshech is Beriyah, is more in a concealed state, even though it has tremendous power in there and potency, but it's still in a concealed state. So in discussing, that's where the Rebbe Rasha began, V'yesh l'hoyer. I'm reading the third line of the paragraph on new paragraph on page 1390. I'm going to sum up what we learned so far and continue from there. So he's continued to explain Beriyah and Yetzirah, and let me just see one thing. Did he mention Chochmah and Binah already? Yeah, he did. At the bottom of the last page, he compared Ayin and Yesh to Chochmah and Binah, that it's all relative. That when compared to a higher level, Ayin, like Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiyah, compared to a higher level, it's like Yesh, but compared to a lower level, it's still Ayin, because it's a three-step process. Okay, in the way things are developed. So now he brings Yesh L'Hoyer, and he brings the concept of Iggulim and Yosher. I gave a relatively long introduction in the last class. I'm not going to do that again now. If anyone wants to go back to get a more context and perspective on what we're learning now, I would suggest going to the last class or two, where I explained the whole concept of Iggulim v'Yosher in the context of Beriyah and Yetzirah. So Iggulim v'Yosher is part of the process of how God put into place circles and line. That's literally, Iggulim means circles or spheres, and line. Now, I pointed out sometimes that today in the computer language, we have zeros and ones. 0 and 1 is essentially a circle and a line. So very, very fitting, because the circle represents something that's more infinite. A circle is like endless. There's no top, there's no bottom. It's also surrounding. It's more of a transcendent energy. A song is compared to a circle. A dance is compared to a circle. A line has a hierarchy. As soon as you have a line, there's a top and there's a bottom. That's what a line is. So there's Ma'ila Mata. So a line represents integration, internalizing. If we only had Eres Makifim, we'd have very powerful transcendent energies, but we wouldn't have the structure of existence. So that's why you have the Igul HaGadol, Save of Kalalman, and Mamala Kalalman is the energy that enters and is tailored to each specific part of the human being. So, for example, in volume 1, he spoke of Rotzen is generally a Makif. Well, it's not generally, it's always a Makif. Because Rotzen means I want. But what do you want? Everything. I could want to eat, I could want to drink, I could want to talk, I could want to sleep, I could want to learn, I could want to do many different things. So Rotzen is a Makif, as is Tainug. But the Koiches HaNefesh, or the 10 spheres, those are Pnimim. Chachma has a particular location, a particular function, the function of conceiving of an idea. Binah's function and location is understanding the idea, developing it. Das is the concentration or the conclusion, or the bonding with the idea. Chesed is on the right, kindness, Gvura, discipline. So now you're talking about, just like you have the power of a vision in the eye and the power of hearing in the ear, that's called a koyach pnimi. That's called Yosher. Iggulim is the makif. So there's a makif over every Yosher. There's a makif over any energy. There's going to be how it hovers, so to speak, is outside of and beyond the internalization. Alter Rebbe explains makif does not mean outside of. He means it's just beyond us. It's like a transcendent energy. And then there's the primistic energy. And Kabbalah explains, and Chassidus at length, that you need both. Because you need a Ratzon, you need God's will, as I explained, Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvayse v'tzivanu, but also you need Dira b'tachtenim, we need to penetrate and permeate the details. Every mitzvah has its detail. Every mitzvah focuses on another part of existence. There are things that are involved with mineral, with vegetation, with animal, with human, all the details of existence. In the Mishkan, you have the Urias, the walls, that were like Makif, Iggulim, and Yosher with the Kalim, the Aron, the Ark, the Menorah, the table, the Shulchan, the Mizbeach, the altar. The Tzemach Tzedek has a beautiful mimer, Mitzvah Binyan Migdash, in Terech Mitzvah Secha, where he talks about it relatively at length. It's an Alter Rebbe's mimer, but very fundamental discourse on Makifim and Primim, Iggulim and Yosher. And you're always, wherever you turn, look at Mitzvah Sukkah. Sukkah is a makif. It surrounds us. Lulav and Esrig, you say v'lekachtem lochem. They're more specific. The 4 minim. Each one has their species, and you take it to your heart. Talis is a makif. Tzitzis are strands, are pnimim. So wherever you turn in mitzvahs, you're always going to find in Torah mitzvahs, you're going to find makif and pnimi. It's universal. Because it's essentially referring to the more transcendent energy, and then the more specific and detailed, we call it imminent energy. Ultimately, you want a combination of it. Basically, Aramimcha is a makif, Remamus, Keser. Alakai Melech is the divine as it manifests in Alakai, Elakim, Lashon Rabim, details, Gematria Hateva, and Melech. Melech, which is a Melech ala Am, Melech that relates to a nation. So that's just a general overview of Iggulim v'Yosher. In our context, he's going to explain Iggulim relates more to Beriyah and Yosher to Yetzirah. So Iggulim, even though it's higher than Yosher because it's a higher energy, but like I'll just draw upon certain lines that we read. The Iggulim l'maylam b'chinas hayosher, u'makol mokim Iggulim b'chinas Nefesh, v'Yosher b'chinas Ruach. Iggulim is Nefesh. Why? Because Iggulim are more concealed. And Yosher is more Ruach, which is a higher level, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. So Iggulim, actually, in the He, you can sometimes see the eagle more, because the eagle, like a circle, from the top goes down to the bottom, so the bottom and the top have something in common. But if you want to have revelation, structure, far more in Ruach, where the Midas are, Chagas. So now he says like this. So then he brought Eitz Chaim's, and I actually looked it up. I said I would look into it. And I think the way I explained it was pretty accurate, the way consistent with the Eitz Chaim's. The next few pages is going to be, the Rebbe Rashab is going to be quite overwhelmingly citing, you'll see his bikiyas, his expertise in Kabbalah, awesome, of how he's throwing around different sources in Kabbalah and just connects it all to this idea. as I said, this we'll find an Ayin Beis from time to time, where the Rebbe Rashab starts grounding the ideas and sources, and also broadening and expanding them into other sugyas, other themes that all connect, which only demonstrates again how Ayin Beis is such a comprehensive encyclopedia of all the concepts in Chassidus and Kabbalah that the Rebbe Rashab is bringing together. So though the central subject is Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Talmud and Mishnah, as we began learning, but now it's definitely broadening as we start seeing the connection to Iggulim Yosher, to Toyo and Tikkun, to Chachma and Binah, as we'll see as this develops. I pointed this out. This is going to be a good few pages, but it's all, keep in mind, Beriyah, Yetzirah, these two central levels, and I think it'll be easier to navigate. So the next step, which I'm going to go over again now, I think, you know what, I'll read it inside. Why not? It was a little dense, might as well read it again inside. And but before I do, I want to just stop for a moment before I go into this dense piece. If any questions about what I've said, or you want any clarity on what I've said so far. We're fine. Okay. Good. So,
Rabbi Jackson, I did have a quick question. In Seder Shtalshalis, it goes from Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, of course, Asiya. So but in the Seder of that we're discussing right now, Mikrah, Mishnah, and Talmud, it doesn't go in that order. It goes starts from Mikrah and Atzilus, right, to Mishnah in Yetzirah, and then Talmud back up to a higher level to Beriyah.
No, it's not correct. If you go back to page, the bottom of page 1364, on top of 1365, he spells it out very specifically. There's two ways Kabbalah describes Mikrah, Mishnah, Talmud. First, he brings Priyetz Chaim, that Talmud is Beriyah, Mishnah be Yetzirah, and Mikrah ba'asiyah. Okay? So Talmud, Mishnah, Mikrah, Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiyah. Then he brings, and it's the Malchus in each level. He says that clearly, I believe. Yeah. But then he brings Moka Macher on top of page 1365. He says, Mikrah, Mishnah, Talmud is Chabad, Chagas, Nehiyah, Atzilus. Now, Mikrah is Chabad, Mishnah is Chagas, and Talmud is Nehi, which seems to be exact, first of all, the opposite order. And now they're all in Atzilus. So he goes on to explain in that page, I don't know if you were at the class then, but that's where it all begins. That's why it's critical to look there to understand what we're learning now. So he explains at length how Chabad, like he says, the next paragraph says, Apizeh Yuvan, the Mikrah Based, the Nezeis Vadai, the Mikrah Mepchinas Chabad Atzilus. That's a certainty. That's certain that Mikrah comes from Chabad of Atzilus. And it's the highest level. It's higher than Mishnah and Talmud, as he explains there. I'm reading from there. Because it's coming from such a high level, Chabad of Atzilus, the Yesedasa Bahari Kedesh, that's foundation is in the higher mountains, in the holy hills or mountains. Chochmei, that's why it comes down all the way into Asiyah, into a simple story and basic mitzvahs. Mishnah comes from the next level, so it doesn't go down as low. It's in Yetzirah, and Talmud, which comes from the lowest level, Nehi of Atzilus, that manifests only in Chabad, only in Beriyah, cannot go into Yetzirah and Asiyah, as he explains at length. So that's the structure, how it works. It gets confusing because here Mikrah, Mishnah, Talmud is in that order. Then suddenly in the Eilamus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiyah, Talmud is the highest. But that's why he's pointing out that Talmud is the highest because through the struggle of Talmud, you're reaching the ayin that's even higher than Chochmah, than Chabad. But in Gilui, Mishnah is higher because you're getting that crystal clarity. That's what I explained before. At the end of the day, it comes down to what is higher, that which comes from above in a very clear way, or that which we work on through our efforts. What's the Baal Tshuva or the Tzaddik? And that's how you have to look at these two orders here going on at once. Initially, it seems confusing, but when you start thinking, you realize that it fits very well. It depends what you're talking about. If you're talking from the top down, from the clarity from above, clarity from below, etc. A person prefers one measure of their own than 9 measures you receive from your friend. Now we know $9 million is a lot more than $1 million. And still the Gemara says that. So what's the answer? The appreciation, what you've earned. When you haven't earned it, you'll also blow it quicker. You don't own it. It's not integrated. So it's true. In pure firepower, 9 is more than 1. But in quality, internalization, the 1 has something that the 9 doesn't have. Just to give another example in this context. Okay. So he's bringing out Iggulim v'Yosher, and basically made the statement Iggulim is Nefesh, and Yosher, though it's lower, is Ruach. And now he explains. Dehine be'etz Chaim. I'm reading for the 4th line of the paragraph on page 1390. We learned this already, but it doesn't hurt reading it again. And now I'm reading it also after looking into the Eitz Chaim. I did a little more delving into it and studying it. So it's quite, when you read it inside, I wish we had the time. We could learn the whole Eitz Chaim, but it's going to be very, very dense. And I thought of doing it, but it's just too much. There's so much material there that the Rebbe Rashab is summing it up in a few lines. You read it there, it can take a few months just to get through it. But let's see. We'll try to sum it up. Okay, so the first issue I had, I couldn't find Shar Nekudim Perek Zayin. There's no 7 chapters, only 6 chapters. So then I realized that this is a mistake. It should be Perek Aleph, because what he's writing now is written in chapter 1. I even looked in different Eitz Chaims. I thought maybe some Eitz Chaims, the chapters are broken differently, and so on. It's actually called Sharei Nekudes there. Heichel Nekudes, actually. But he calls it Sharei Nekudim, so it's actually Perek Aleph. And I know it's that the case because the later sources that he brings are from chapters that are close by, and they're very clear. So I would have to look up the manuscript. I'm almost sure that the Rebbe Rashab probably wrote Perek Aleph, but when they published it, they didn't notice the difference between an Aleph and a Zayin. Could be confusing sometimes. But regardless, it's Perek Aleph. So this is what it says in Eitz Chaim there. Kosav, the Shem Mad the Tikkun, Shu B'chinas Yosher, Hu B'zo B'Yetzirah. So I'm not going to go through the whole introduction explanation of this. I explained it, I'll just say it briefly. That the world of Tikkun is driven by the Shem Ma, which is the name of Bittel. Ma is Bittel. Gematria Adam. Ban is Gematria Behema, more Yesh. Associated more with Tohu. Ma is the Shem Ma of Tikkun, which is the level of Yosher, because Yosher, when you only have Iggulim, and Tohu is sometimes referred to a world of Iggulim, you have a lot of energy, but it's not coordinated. Imagine putting a bunch of circles together. You won't have a coordinated structure. A structure is defined by Yosher, by a hierarchy, everything in its place. Think of a human body. If we only had Ratzon, if we only had an Ur Makif and Koiches Makifim, we'd have very powerful energies, but we wouldn't have the defined parameters of a very specific structure. It's like anyone, some people like sometimes a genius starts speaking and it just sounds like complete nonsense because they're not structuring their words. It's just flowing, a free flow of consciousness without any structure. Yosher is what creates structure. So the tikkun of Ma'av tikkun is the Yosher, and where is it primarily? In the Zah of Atzilus. The Zah will be Yetzirah, because Zah is mekanana nests in Yetzirah. Shehu b'chinas Ruach, v'zeh Ruach shel hanekudim. And this is the Ruach, the so-called inner spirit, the Neshama, like the Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. The Nefesh of Nekudim is Iggulim. That's its called its primary functionality is in a form of Iggulim, Ksarim, like Keser, and therefore there's all the chaos and the lack of balance and harmony. But it's the Yosher of Yetzirah, of Zah and Yetzirah, that brings the Ruach into it, And Ruach creates that balance and creates the harmony. Additionally, I should add, which I didn't mention, if you may recall that when we talk about microcosm, macrocosm, so we know there's Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiyah, and microcosm. In macrocosm, what are the levels of Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiyah? Atzilus, the Klolos, is generally Malchus of Ein Sof, the 10 hidden spheres before the Tzimtzum. Beriyah, the Klolos, in macrocosm, is Adam Kadmon, the first world after the Kav, after the Tzimtzum and the Kav. Then comes Yetzirah, the Klolos. Yetzirah, the Klolos is explained either it's Atik Yemen and Arachampin Keser, or in some places it's called Yetzirah is Toihu, the Kudim. That's Yetzirah, the Klolos, the world of Toihu. And then comes Asiyah, the Klolos. Asiyah in macrocosm is Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiyah in microcosm. So Tikkun and then Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiyah. So just another point how Yetzirah has association with Nekudim. So bottom line is, okay, so what do you see from this? The Rebbe Rashab is trying to demonstrate here that you see that Ruach is connected to Yosher, and even though Iggulim are higher than Yosher, but Yosher has the Gilui and integration and internalization that creates this higher power of Ruach over Nefesh. So we did this parentheses, and I'll just do it again. Ubeshar Shviras HaKelim, the next shar after Shar Nekudim in Eitz Chaim, the next one he talks about the shattering of the containers. The Nekudim are the points. In this case, like the Nekudim are like these points. So there in Pedig Beis Kosav, Kfar Yadaita Kishem Mab, and it's correct. Shem Mab there is the Shem connected to Ana B'Chayach. You know, when we say Sfiras Ha'emer, you see Ana B'Chayach, and then it says Abag Yatatz. Those acronyms. That's all leads to a name called Shem Mab, a name of 42 letters. And it has a particular power. It manifests who be Yetzirah. Shem Mab will be Yetzirah, Yetzirah B'china Zah. So he repeats again, the Yetzirah is the level of Zah. Because remember, Zah nests in Yetzirah, Binah nests in Beriyah, Chachma nests in Atzilus, and Nehi nests, Malchus nests in Asiyah. But for our purposes, Mazah is nests in Yetzirah, so that's Shem Mab. Okay. These are the 7 kings in Pasha Vayishlach, Vayimlach, Vayamos. The kings refer to the Iggulim of Tohu, that they reigned, they were powerful, but they died because they broke, they shattered, because there was too much intensity. The Hem said Melochim Shemesu, and the Nekudis of these Zayin Melochim are in Yetzirah, and that's the secret of the kings that died. Because Nekudis is the level of Zah, which is Yetzirah. Nekudis has another element. I don't want to confuse matters, but I need to mention it because we're going to learn it soon. We know that when you write the Hebrew alphabet, there's 4 dimensions. There's the letters, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. There's the Nekudis, the punctuation, that Kometz, Patach, Segel, Seire, etc. Like, how do you read? When you say, for example, the word Bereshis. So Beis, Bereshis is the letters. The pronunciation, however, is based on the vowels. So I'm sorry, not the vowels. The punctuation, Bereshis. You don't say Bereshis. You don't say Bareshis. You say Be Shva, Beis Shva, Rei, Yetzirah. So there are words Anoichi, Kometz Alepha, Anoichi, Aleph. So the pronunciation is called the Nekudis. So these are points. Like a Kometz is a line with a little dot. A Patach is just a line. A Segel is 3 dots, right, left, and center. Then there's a Malup. I mean, there's all the different shapes and forms of these points, but they're points. Then there's Tagin. There's what's what I said? What did I say? Eisius and Kudes, Tagin and Taimim. So Tagin are the crowns on top of a letter. When you look at a Sefer Torah or a Tefillin, you see on the shin, on top of the left box, you'll see 3 very thin lines. Those are called the Tagin. They're like the crowns. And then you have taimi hamikra, the timing. And that's the trup. How do you read? When you say Bereshit bara Elokim, how do you read it when we read in the Kriyas HaTorah? So that's the trup that we have, that tells us how to read it, the right sing-song. So these four levels play a very big role in Kabbalah, especially in this context of Toyu and Tikkun, because it's all about balance. For the letters to be proper, you have to have the letters, you have to have their pronunciation, you have to have their crowns, and you have to have their song. And that's when you have a perfect balance. So another point of Nekudis is, besides that it's points, it's also these punctuation marks. That's what he says there as well. He's soon going to refer to it. I know this is pretty heavy. If you haven't learned it before, it's like mixing so many things together. But this is what the Rebbe Rashab is bringing. I'll try to elaborate more as we go. But meanwhile, that's what he says. So the Nekudis Shalai, the Nekudis of Shema B'Yetzirah, so said Zayim Melachim, Nekudis Shalai B'Yetzirah, V'hem said Melachim Shemesik Nekudis B'chin Zashahu Yetzirah. However, the vart here is not that it stays in the state of Toyu. The point is that you want to repair this harmony. So he says, Ach Nirasham. However, it appears from when you read the Eitz Chaim there, the Shem Mab Hu L'Sakin. Shem Mab is coming to repair the imbalance. Kamesha Kosov, like he writes there. And where does he write? In Shar Shvir Sakelim, chapter 2, he writes these words. Omnom Kavona Shem Mab Zeh. However, the purpose of this Shem Mab, and it's also the kavanas within the Shem Mab, is lahales kol berurim misham, to elevate all the berurim. Like we said, berurim are only possible when you have a dissonance. That's where you need clarification and separation. Ki kol Shem Mab hu lahalis, because the whole purpose of Shem Mab is to elevate. So now the Rebbe Rashab adds his pshat in Eitz Chaim, because when you read it, it's not very clear. So he says, "Ve'efsher shezeh b'chinas Iggulim v'Yosher the Nekudim," that the Nekudim also have Iggulim v'Yosher. Ki mavur b'shar ha-Nekudim sham. What's the Iggulim? The Iggulim is a state, a higher state, but a state that's not integrated. That's called Nefesh. And the Yosher of the Nekudim is Yetzirah and Zu'n, that creates order of these Nekudis. So it's not just chaotically orbiting points, but they come into an organized form, and that's what Shem Mab accomplishes in Yetzirah. Then he says, "V'ayim hashikosa b'sefer Kelis Yankiv, ve'erech Iggulim v'Yosher." I mentioned that Kelis Yankiv. I didn't look that up yet. Is an encyclopedia, Kabbalistic encyclopedia. He says to look there in the entry on Iggulim v'Yosher, and also in the entry Umashikosa be'erech Mab, and also in the entry on the name Amab. I will, Mitzvah Hashem, I will look that up as well and give you my findings. Share with you my findings. So that's the parentheses. Hare Mavur, what's the conclusion? The Yetzirah hu b'chinas Ruach v'Yosher. So straight source, that Yetzirah is Ruach v'Yosher, it's what creates order in something that remains somewhat in disorder. And then he says, Ubriya Yeshlemer. And based on this, Yeshlemer, that Beriyah, Shezeh b'chinas Nefesh or b'chinas Iggulim, is the level of Nefesh, which is lower, and Iggulim, which is higher, but it remains, but like we said, because it could be higher, but it's not begili and not integrated. That's why it only manifests in the form of Nefesh. It's Yetzirah that creates the shape and form that ultimately gives something redeems essentially the Nekudim of Tohu as they travel through Beriyah and Yetzirah. Okay. So even though there's plenty of it's definitely worthwhile exploring deeper this whole concept of Nekudim in Yetzirah, the punchline that the Rebbe Rashab wants is to tell us that Yetzirah has a quality over Beriyah. Though it's a lower world, because it's gili, its shape and form, its revelation, it's the level of Ruach. Yeah. To give a little example, just to make it a little more palpable, I'll say the following, or palatable. Which one works here? I confuse them sometimes. I think palatable. Okay. Chassidus brings the difference between a child and adult, that you could have a genius child, the brilliant mind, but their emotions are still immature. So even though the child could understand a lot, but because the emotions are not developed, something we learned this earlier, mutfa, murgish, muskul, and so on. So the child will still have an immaturity to them, can throw a tantrum, and not really be able to have relationships and so on. So one of the ways Chassidus explains is because das has not yet really developed. To have the midas, the mature midas, you need to have gadlus hamechin, gadlus hadas. So a child could have a lot of chochmah and binah, but because the das hasn't developed, so das is meilid, gives birth to the midas, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. It's not just enough to have a father and a mother, chochmah and binah, you also have to have an intimacy between them. And children are not capable of intimacy. They just don't know what a relationship is yet. They don't have the maturity for it. They don't have the bandwidth, the emotional bandwidth, essentially. So essentially, when you have Chochmah and Binah dominating, as much as powerful as that is, and it's higher than Midas, we know Chabad or Chochmah and Binah is higher than Zah. And yet, it is Zah that creates the harmony and the balance and the maturity in the human being. Because there's integration. So if you talk about pure firepower, the mind is always more powerful than the emotions. Purely, I'm talking about in its pure divine energy. But you're talking about a mature person. Mature person means someone who knows also how to put their mind aside or knows balance, moderation. That's why you'll see some people who are like geniuses, but they have no common sense. You ask them something, they'll tell you what it says in the books. But sometimes you need discipline. Sometimes you need subtlety. Sometimes you need the tact, diplomacy. You need emotional intelligence to really live a healthy life. So people who only have great minds, they live in their heads, they're not capable of really having healthy relationships, that alone. A relationship requires another level of experience that comes from emotional maturity. So what do you see from this? That those Zah is a lower level than Mechin, but it's Zah where you really have an integrated human being. I can't tell you how many people I have met and counseled and worked with, where the Chabad is very powerful. Not everybody, but there are. But the Midas, they remain little children, immature, insecure, afraid, and many actually hide behind their minds, play mind games, chess games, to protect their emotions. They're afraid to go there because emotions can be very frightening for a vulnerable child. So a person could be an adult in their brain big time, but emotionally they can be 5 years old, 7 years old, even if they mask it and hide it. Because emotions are a whole different, I don't call it animal, a whole different reality. So to put this in more like Chassidus applied terms, in Toyu, the intensity of the Moichin and intensity of the Makifim in general are very powerful. But it doesn't have, if you were able to put it into functional and dysfunctional terms, Toyu is a dysfunctional world. It's not an evil world, God forbid. It's a world that God created, but it's a dysfunctional one because there's no balance. The energies are too intense for the containers. They don't cooperate with each other. There's no interaction. There's no interconnectivity. It's like a body that, God forbid, all the organs would go to war against each other, each one claiming I'm superior. We learned about this in close to the end of volume 1 at length, the way the psychology or the personality of Toyu. Psychologically, Toyu is the model of dysfunctionality, of chaos. It could be, in our world, it can manifest in ways that are very, very dark, abusive, and so on. But even on a so-called spiritual level, it's chaotic. There's no order. Things are not organized. There's no harmony. Shalom, there's no shalom. There's no that third dimension, Tiferes, that creates balance and harmony. So in that context, that's why sometimes you say Toyu is nukudes. Point. In Atzilus and Tikkun, you'll say it's iskalalus. It goes chesed to the right, gvura to the left, Tiferes in the middle, It's a structure. It's not just a bunch of 10 different spheres that exist, one beneath the other. They are working in coordination with each other. They're synchronized. So in the context, using psychological terminology, Zu'n of Yetzirah has therefore quality over the Binah of Beriyah, because Beriyah is still in that more amorphous state, has not yet come into a fully shaped, mature, integrated circuit or integrated unit that Yetzirah is. And that's why Yetzirah is Ruach, and Iggulim Beriyah is Nefesh. Okay. A little practical explanation. So now we're ready to continue. Any questions? And now you'll see why I brought about the letters, because now this piece, this is where we stopped on Friday. I'll continue now. Dehine be'etz chaim shara tikun perik dalet. So again, you see the Rebbe Rashab is letting loose pretty much with his with the Kabbalah. And I looked around. I have not found this in previous Maimorim, this whole piece. That doesn't mean it's not there. I just haven't found it yet. But it's very likely this is the Rebbe Rashab, which is always interesting to see the Rebbe Rashab in his full glory, showing us his, revealing a bit of his knowledge in Eitz Chaim. You look at the Eitz Chaim, you could see the Rebbe Rashab's mastery, because he's taking pages upon pages and just really, very concentrated way, really bringing the points out and explaining it as well. I would love to know how the Mukubalim read it without the Yeshlemers that the Rebbe Rashab says here. Because I looked in the commentaries there, and the Rebbe Rashab is definitely adding understanding in the Eitz Chaim, the Yeshlemers here. So now it says like this, next Eitz Chaim. Dehine be'etz chaim shar hatikun. So we had so far shar nekudim, shar shvir sakelim, now he's going shar hatikun. Perik Daled. Chapter 4, Kosav, he writes, the Tagin ve'esius, remember we said 4 levels. Esius, Nekudes, Tagin, and Taimim. Or sometimes the order is Taimim, Tansa, Taimim, Nekudes, Tagin, Esius. So he says like this, that the Tagin and the Esius, the Tagin are the crowns, those little lines on top of different letters. And the letters, Mehem Nasu Biyah. It's from those crowns and those letters that Biyah was created. Who? And he explained, the Tagin, Hem Chinas Binah. The Tagin referred to a level of Binah. The Asi is Bechinas Zu'n, Zoh Malchus. Zu'n is Zoh v'Nukva. So Tagin, like crowns, is the level of Binah. And the letters is Zu'n. Now we know in Beriyah, Yetzirah, Siyah, Biyah, you need both. We have both Binah and Midas. So he says the Tagin is the source the Tagin is the level of Binah, and the Asis is the level of Zu'n. V'harei Ima mekanino b'kursaya. And now we know that Ima, Binah, which is compared to the mother, mekanino nests from the word kan, nests. In Kursaya is the kisei, the throne, which means the world of the throne, which is the world of Beriyah. There goes another Eitz Chaim. Interesting, he doesn't say the name of the shar. Here he gives us the number. Gate 47, chapter 3. Shabina, like it says there, Shabina nasa b'chinas mosach. Umislabish b'Beriyah. That how does Binah become nests in Beriyah? So Binah of Atzilus becomes, Mosach is a curtain, like a partition. And Mislabish, and it manifests and encloses itself in Beriyah. It can't do so in its full glory in Atzilus because Beriyah is not Atzilus. Atzilus is divine. Binah in Atzilus is a divine revelation without any filter. When it comes into Beriyah, it goes through, becomes a Mosach, Binah is like manifesting in type of, it gets shrouded, like in a curtain, and then it can dress itself up in Beriyah. So it's essentially Binah Vatzilis manifesting in Beriyah. So what do you see from this? So how do you have Beriyah? Himabchinas Tagin Shazeo Binah. So like he said, Biyah comes from the Tagin and the Atheist, that Beriyah comes from the level of Tagin, of these crowns, Shazeo Binah. That's the level of Binah. And what is Tagin when you talk about Nefesh and Ruach? Tagin, the crowns, the Tagin, who b'chinas Nefesh be'esius. In the letters, in the Hebrew letters, Tagin is the level of Nefesh. So we have Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, correspond to the four. I'm not sure how they correspond. I think Tagin is Nefesh. I'm almost sure that Asius, let's see, does he say here? I'm not sure. I'm almost sure that Taimim is almost sure Chaya. Tagin is, he says, Nefesh. Oisius and Nukudis, I'm not sure which one. I think Nukudis is Ruach, and Oisius may be Neshama. I'm not sure. Anyway, but he says like this. So Tagin is the level of Nefesh in the world of Oisius, Kamesha Kosab Eitz Chaim, like he says in Eitz Chaim, now another Eitz Chaim, Shar Tanso. Tanso is an acronym for Taimim Nukudis, Tagin Oisius, Pedeg Vov. Chapter 6. So let me just slow down and just sum up what he just said. So what do we have here? Beriyah comes from Tagin. Tagin is the level of Binah as it manifests in Beriyah, and that's the level of Nefesh, which was what we said earlier, like Iggulim, Nefesh. Yetzirah, we're going to learn, is a different level. We'll soon get to that. So that's Beriyah. The Rebbe Rashab now brings another Eitz Chaim. Ubeshara Nekudim Pedig Vov. Remember, I mentioned Shara Nekudim only has 6 chapters. So in the 6th chapter, he writes, Kosav, the Tagin, Shein L'mayla Ma'esius, the crowns that are above the letters. Remember, the crowns are always on top of the letters. Zeo B'chinas Ha'edus She'emdim L'mayla Ma'esius. These are the energies that rise above and stand above the actual letters. Shehein HaKelim. The letters are like kalim, like containers. And these iris that are above them, which is the crowns, the tagin, ume'idim lehem, radiate to them, ha'ora mu'at merachik, a diminished a reflection from a distance. So essentially, when you look at the letters in Hebrew, the Hebrew letters themselves convey a message. The message, let's say, take any words. Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. I am your God that took you out of Mitzrayim. That's the letters. The Tagin on those letters, if you read them, what do they indicate? They're concealed from us. We don't know what they're hinting to. You need to have someone who has a deeper understanding of the secrets that are embedded in these Tagin, these crowns. So he's calling that iris that are above the Kalim because they're not something that we can understand. The words are Noicha Hashem Lekech, we understand. Breisha is Bar Lekim, we understand the words. But the Tagin are hinting to energies that are higher than the letters, and only a very diminished flow enters from a distance. That's what the Tagin are. So what do you see from this? That's why he calls them Visham, and there at Eitz Chaim he says, Shazem Moira al Istalkus Ha'eres V'Achayis Ma'Kelim. That indicates on that these energies and this vitality is removed from the containers, because we can't understand them. They are something that is like he says here, V'hein b'chinas eres makifrim the tayu. They are the transcendent energies of tayu. That's why they're like crowns. Shehein b'chinas nefesh. That's why the tagin is the level of nefesh, because like we said before, it's a higher level, but it's concealed. Like Beriyah is a higher level, but it's concealed. So it's higher, but it's concealed. If we only had Tagin, we wouldn't understand the Torah. We need to have the letters to be able to appreciate and understand. So all of this is coming to establish As I said, the Rebbe Rashab is now grounding it and bring it into other topics where you see the concept of Beriyah being a higher level, but concealed, like Iggulim and Yosher. Yosher is the integrated. Binah, Beriyah is Binah, but that remains above and hovers above. And this case is like Makifim, and therefore they're the level of Nefesh. And Yetzirah will integrate it, will internalize it, as we shall, I'm sure, read shortly. I don't know if we've experienced this level of Kabbalistic immersion, but this is what we've gotten. So this is where we're at. So I'll move slowly and try to elaborate more if need be. So I want to stop if there are any questions. Just a few days ago, I met someone who learned Ayin Beis, this volume, and he said he skipped these pages altogether. He said, what are you going to do when you get there? I said, I'm not going to skip it, that's for sure. We'll get through it. We'll get through it.
I have a question. It's tangential, but since we're here anyways, this Inyan of Nefesh coming from, what level is it again? It's Beriyah?
Yeah, Beriyah. Beriyah, Nefesh, yeah, Iggulim.
Yeah. So the idea, my question is, we have the 5 different levels of the human soul. Nefesh is the lowest. Obviously, Beriyah is not as high as Atzilus, but is there anything practical we can infer from this, that in the Nefesh of Behema, this basic vitality, just the basic core animalistic vitality of the human being, is somehow actually extremely elevated. It just needs to be refined. Can one infer from that, or is that, not something one can draw?
What needs to be refined?
Well, I'm saying it's 2 questions really, but the Nefesh is actually, it's the lowest level of the human soul. It's just that which vitalizes the human being. It's like the blood coursing through your veins. We know this, but nevertheless, it's being associated with Beriyah, which is the first level of the actual, after the Tzimtzum. It's a very high level of Elikus. So my question is it the case that the Nefesh has that level of Elikus? You don't typically think of Nefesh as having that much Elikus. You think of it as having actually the least amount of the 5 different levels of the Neshama. And I'm asking if this is a chiddush, or not, an insight into the nature of the Nefesh, that if it's refined, if it's coming into all this structure of order that we're now talking about.
I don't know if I'd go there right now, because to me, it's more like he's saying that it's a higher level that manifests in a lower level. So he's not so suggesting that in Nefesh there's something higher than Ruach right now. He's just saying that it's a higher level, but when it manifests in a revealed form, it's more like a Nefesh. It's like the highest energies come down in a lower form. That's how I would say it right now. I don't think he wants to say more than that right now.
Okay. Do you think it's possible we might get there? I know you don't like to speculate, but
we may not, because it's not what his theme is here. Remember, this is all trying to establish that Beriyah, Yetzirah, that though Beriyah is a higher level, but it manifests but Yetzirah has a quality that Beriyah doesn't have. That's what his real point is. So
that's more defined.
That's what he wants to say. So, the Rebbe Rashab is not going to go off on this tangent. That's not where he's going with this. That's not what he wants to accomplish here. Now, the fact that Talmud, through struggling in Beriyah, Baruch Cheshach, we can access higher levels through our efforts, that's correct. And in that sense, you could say that though it begins as Cheshach, dark, like Nefesh, it's not as revealed as Yetzirah, but through the exertion, we've been learning you could reach higher levels. But I don't know if I would apply that to the word Nefesh per se. I would apply it to Beriyah and Talmud. So we'll see.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
So let's read the next parentheses. He says like this. Yet another Eitz Chaim, Beitz Chaim Sharon Nekudim Perek Beis. And delve and look into Eitz Chaim Sharon Nekudim chapter 2. That Akudim ubchinas Nefesh. That Akudim is the level of Nefesh. Akudim, which is even higher than Akudim. Akudim is the 10 energies in one container. V'zeu shekosav nishba Hashem benafshei. That's what it says, nishba Hashem. The God took an oath benafshei, Nefesh, referring to Akudim. V'ayim mashekosav be'etzes chaim be'inyan zeh b'hagos marnash abnosen. Nosen Shalom, I think his name is marnash. Zal.
Shapiro?
Yeah, Shapiro. Yeah, Nosen Shapiro. Okay, this I would have to look up. The Rebbe Rashab is just being thorough here, my understanding. And what he's showing is that Nefesh goes even higher, goes all the way to Akudim is Nefesh. I mean, briefly, using the example I gave before with the child and the adult, you have to keep in mind that even though in earlier stages of development, higher levels of ishtalshlus, you may have higher power, but it's only in lower levels where it comes together in an integrated form. And whenever it's integrated, like for example, even though Akudim, which let's compare that to the conception of one cell, of a conception of a child, a seed. And the Akudim is it breaks down into details, but it's not yet a coordinated and integrated child. So even though in development process it's a higher level, like Chomer Tzura Tikkun, but in a functional process, in revelation, like we say, Giluyim, and in the process, obviously, there's something in Tikkun, there's something in the full-blown child that is much more powerful, even than the energy that was there in the earlier stages of its development. So the Nefesh part relates to those earlier stages. Ruach, what he calls here in Beriyah, Yetzirah and Zu'n, that's where the integration comes into play. And that's the mile ultimately of Mishnah, like we said before, because Mishnah gives the body and structure, the integrated structure to Mikrah, because it tells us all the halachas, what is right, what is wrong. Talmud in Beriyah is coming to deal with the darkness to help us understand that which isn't clear. But Mishnah is the place where Yetzirah, where the midas of Atzilus are manifesting in a fully mature, integrated way. Yeah. So he's just saying that Akudim is Nefesh, and what he says in Eitz Chaim, I'm not sure. I have to look it up, but I'll do that. Bagos, yeah, Rab Nosson Shapiro, who was one of the Guri Arizal, one of the students of the Arizal, who wrote commentary. Eitz Chaim is yet another sefer from the Arizal that Rab Chaim Vital composed. Okay. Still not over. But the central theme remains the same. Bri Yetzirah, Yetzirah Beriyah Cheshach. So Yetzirah is lower than Beriyah, but because of its Gilui and its integration, it has a Maila Yeseda, like he said, Maila Gdela, because that's the Tachas Kavan is to be an integrated, revealed entity. And the Rebbe Rashab is going to continue now further. I'm going to stop here. I think there's a lot to absorb here. By Vehina Nizbar Le'il, going to go back to Toyu and Voyu. Okay. Yeah. But I think if we keep in mind these 2 points, Pri Yetzirah, 2 states, that's the thread that's going to connect everything we're going to learn. This is going to go now. Wow. Yeah, on page 1392, in 2 pages, is going to go how this is in Avodah, especially 1393. And Avodah, the difference between the Malachim of Beriyah and the Malachim of Yetzirah. But this is all part of the interface because at the end of the day, we want to have all these levels covered. Yeah, he's going to go and Avodah, page 1394, Kadosh Baruch. Yeah. And he's going to go till 1398, and then he's going to go to the third example of Er Makabel, which is vision in the eye. Okay. So welcome to the world of the Rebbe Rashab. Well, we've been learning the Rebbe Rashab all the time, but this is like, takes it to another level. Yeah.
On steroids. Yeah. Pretty intense.
And any other questions?
Are you talking about a malach or a melech when you talk about malachim at this point? Because
What do you mean? What do you mean malachim?
Malachim can mean a collection of malachs or a collection of kings. I mean, I don't know.
I explained this from the end of chapter Parsha Vayishlach in Chumash. It talks about the descendants, the progeny of Esau, that he had these different kings.
Gotcha.
Down to 7 kings that ruled and died. Vayimlach vayomos. So,
because there is a machlokas about it in the beginning of our Yishlach. My friend just told me.
This has nothing to do with this. Absolutely no connection. This is talking the Zion Malachim of Tayu, which are the 7 kings. Melech, like as in Malchus, Keser, Malchus. Very intense. But then by Yomos, that's the Shviris HaKelim, that they die. They shatter. And in Zohar and in Eitz Chaim especially, that's the basis of all this discussion. Those malachim of Tayu. And then what happens, how you repair it, and so on. That's what he's discussing here. Okay, we'll stop at the end of the parentheses. 8 lines from the bottom of page 1390.